What's up YouTube, and welcome back to another Procreate tutorial where today we're going to go ahead and create this really beautiful forest hillside river design. Now, as always, there's links to all of the requirements for today's design over on my Patreon. And I hear you ask, what are the requirements? Well, I typically give you the canvas size so you can follow along with the exact same size of canvas. I give you the palette so you can follow along with the exact same colors. And I believe everything else is built into Procreate, so you shouldn't need anything else. But if there is, it'll be over on my Patreon, and I'll leave a link to those requirements in the description of this video, so make sure to check that out. And while you're over on my Patreon, make sure to check out all of the exclusive content that I've got over there. I've got over 120 Patreon exclusive tutorials at the time of recording, and with 3 added every single month, and you can have your name featured in videos, sneak peeks, early access, and much more. There's so much content for you to check out over there on my Patreon. But you can do me a solid and also subscribe to the channel here on YouTube to help grow the channel as well. I'd greatly appreciate it. So with all that said, enjoy today's tutorial and let's get started. So once you've created your canvas, the first thing we'll do as always is go up to our actions. We'll go to the canvas tab and we will add in a drawing guide. We'll edit that drawing guide as always to 1/4 of your canvas size, which for you, if you're using the same dimensions as me, is 500. And I'm just going to bring the opacity up to around about 60% and hit done. So we've got our grid. Now we use the grid because now you have a grid that's 4x4 and I have a grid that's 4x4. And you can see where I position things, where I come into a square, where I leave a square, and so on. Now we're going to go ahead and start laying out our design. Let's first of all change our background color to the color here, top right of the palette. And then we'll hit done. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go up to our colors. We're going to grab the color in the top left of the palette. We're going to go to our layer, make sure, of course, we're on the empty layer here. We'll go to our brush. We're going to go to inking and the syrup brush. And just in case, we'll go to stabilization. You can see there is 0 and 0 on streamline and stabilization. And then we're going to go ahead and set the size probably to around about 9%. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to draw in the land primarily down in this bottom right area here. So we're going to start off around about, say, here. You want to try and use the bumps and the lumps of the pen, and then we're going to go to a point and then create a banked hill up here. Nothing too detailed, it's just an easier technique sometimes to layer in the land. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get in there and add in a few additional little bumps and lumps just to make it more interesting in terms of a silhouette in a minute. Because then what we're going to do is we're going to draw in another one, and that's going to come through from, say, here. I'm going to come through to around about, say, this point here. And again, you can maybe bulk this one out a little bit if you wanted to, give it a sort of a larger face on it. There we go. And then again, just a little bit of a trail back. We're going to lose these lines, but sometimes it's easier to do it this way. And then again, we're going to go ahead and draw in another piece. Now this is going to be our final one. It's going to run over here, nice and flat into behind there. And then once you draw in your lower layer, you can draw in the higher and then make sure it runs to here. And then you just need to draw in the general hillside, which is going to come bounding down like this over and into that line. And then that way you've got your silhouette. Now we're not going to fill it in just yet because we also want to draw in some additional rocks down here too. So for example, I want to draw in like a rock that's in the land. I'm just going to draw its shape fully in the water, so a little bit off from the land. I'm just going to change up that shape. And I'm drawing them in perfectly now because then again, we can just fill it in a minute, and then you're going to have to just use your memory just to remember roughly where you've laid out the land and all the additional options in there. So I'm going to add some rock maybe back there too. Got one scattered in there, and then maybe I'll draw in another one fairly close to it as well, sticking its head out of the water like so. Awesome. Then you want to go ahead and grab your color, drag it into here, tap on up here and go to continue filling, and you can just tap in the gaps and make sure you fill it all in. And now you've got your hillside silhouette with your nice rocky little bit of land towards the bottom. Let's go ahead and just rough up the top edge. So we're going to go to our brush, we're going to go to drawing, and we're going to use the option of Eagle Hawk. It's going to be the primary brush for today, and we're going to set the opacity to 100%. Size can be 49. Now this brush is pressure sensitive. If you press really light, you'll get these kind of speckled kind of effects here. You press a little bit firmer, you can get these kind of rounded shapes. That's somewhat what we're going to be looking for. You can tap with a little bit of pressure as well, and I keep tapping. This is just demonstration, you don't need to do this, but I'm just showing you how you can utilize the brush. I'm tapping with a little drag with a little bit of pressure, but if you press really firm, you'll get something like this. So we can utilize every little layer in there, especially this light version here with our pressure, keeping it nice and light. So I'm going to undo all of that. And then we are, as I mentioned, going to rough up the edge. So I'm just going to go ahead with that 49% brush size, just get down here and trying to create more like vegetation, a little something a little bit further back, maybe some light pressure running through there, some heavy pressure, just some interesting variation, like there's something else maybe on the far side of it. As it rolls its way over, it gets a little bit thinner with the light coming through the hillside potentially, and you can always adjust this at a later point as well. So this doesn't need to be your be all and end all. You can probably pack it out a little bit more at the top up here, and then a couple of little taps like so, just to create something a little bit sharper here and there like so. Now we're going to focus most of our attention in this foreground. It's probably going to be the majority of this tutorial duration because the background will be nice and quick, this hillside and the one behind it. So don't worry if we're spending a little bit too much time here. It is, again, the majority of the design today. Now we're going to go ahead and create a new layer, tap on it, clipping mask it to the ground, and we're going to swipe from left to right, group them together, and we're going to rename the group, and we're going to call it, let's just call it foreground, because it's right in front of us, of course. And then this empty layer here, we're going to go ahead and go to our colors. We're going to grab the brown in the middle of the first column. Your brush probably wants to be smaller, probably around about the 18% mark. And we're going to start drawing in the rocks. And I always love to do this in a particular way. I'm going to draw in a bit of a diagonal fashion, leaving gaps here and there, and just tapping and dragging in here. We do have a lighter tone to add. You can make some fairly high, but just diagonal kind of lines, leave some gaps for shadows, as I said. And then some of them you can go over yourself a couple of times and make them a little bit more prominent. But we just want to add in some rocky shapes down here towards our water's edge. So a little something like that, a couple of gaps. And I'm just taking a look just to see how that looks. And then as we get a little bit over towards here, I just want you to start to kind of fade them out. Don't allow it to be kind of too bright in this bottom right hand area. So I'm just bulking in some kind of brown shapes along the shoreline for our rocks. Now we're going to go ahead and also continue that over here on this big boulder here too. So a couple of rocks, and then diagonal towards the bottom right as you make your way round the shape. And you can drag them a little bit higher as well if you want to, really add in some tone on them. And then I'll bring the brush size down to an 8% and add in some dashes on this rock here too. So diagonal, kind of just working off of the top point, a little bit along the bottom edge of these ones, like so. And then we need to remember where we drew our sort of hills in. You can remember that obviously there's kind of like a line here which we drew in. So this area over here is a hillside in front. So you can go sort of right up towards here if you want to. A couple of dashes and scrapes along that edge. But make sure you leave space so that you can go in behind and add in some more. Now again, we're also going to try and remember that that is a rock. So I don't want to get too close to what I imagine is its silhouette. So I'm going to add in some rocks there, and I'm just varying the brush size about 10% now. It's just where I feel I need a larger brush size potentially because of the shape. And again, we're abiding by the silhouette. And notice how if I do this, I actually start to reveal the silhouette. I could, for example, draw some rocks here, and that just somewhat to a degree helps your mind kind of work out that rocky shape and its full structure. Likewise here again. Now this is, of course, is getting a little bit further back, so you may want to just quickly just dash along some brown along the edge there. Maybe some 4% in there as well, just some additional smaller details. And don't be afraid to run the odd one a little bit further up so that there's just some variation. And when you zoom out, all the edge of your cliff now should have this nice little touch to it. Now there is another color though, bottom left of the palette, that we need to introduce on top of them. And so that's only going to somewhat feature somewhat here and then this side over here. So we can go along a few of these rocks with, I've got a small brush size, about 5%. You can go along a few of them, maybe even lower your opacity, but you can add some towards like the left edge of some of those shapes that you created. A couple of taps and scrapes. You can go all the way to the very bottom. You can link some together if you want to. And you can also, don't be afraid to sacrifice some of them as well, in terms of just leave them to the shadows. So for example, on this rock here, I might even just introduce a little bit along this left side, and that's it. A couple in that gap. A few more along this edge over here. I might even make the brush size a bit bigger again, about 10%. Really go for the color in there. But I'm leaving a few of those original tones in there. That would just give us some variation to the edge. And then likewise, down the very edge over here, Couple of taps, quite quick on this edge over here because it's quite far back. And then we'll bring the brush size down to about 6% and start adding in some on these little rocks as well. Couple of taps and scrapes, couple of light bits of pressure. You can always lower your opacity if you want to get some more tone in there. But for me, if I just add in a little bit along, say this edge over here, I think we're good. I think that's everything I'd need to add to the edge of the land, maybe just an occasional little scrape of something over here just to make it a little bit more interesting to look at. Now let's go ahead and work on the actual hillside. So let's go ahead and create another new layer. We'll tap on it and we will clipping mask it. And we'll go to our colors. We're going to utilize this green at the top of the second column. Brush size back up to around about sort of, I think you could probably go as large as the 49%, but you want to kind of be a bit careful. But in this foreground area, this front hill here, you can probably add in a bit more color. Now we want to kind of show that there's a bank. So my pressure is quite light at the minute, so it might be a bit of a pain to see on screen. I'm going to bring the brush size down to 35%. I'm going to link into that bit of rocky area here and try and define with a few scrapes and a few different twists in my lines, a little bit of a banked hillside making its way down. I'm going to undo a few of those because they weren't quite what I wanted. Now the one thing we want to do is first of all run a few right down towards the shore. That'll look great. But also over here in the bottom right, just kind of leave it quite dark. It's quite a dark area of land. And then equally, we'll go ahead and move over to here. So I've got about a 30% brush size. Now what we will do is we will drag our greens underneath our rocky tones. And then that way I can go right the way down and not worry about sort of interfering with them. Now you can make the land quite flat in certain places, like by dragging in a much more horizontal fashion. And then, boom, big hillside, big banked bit of color up towards the top. And then you can let that kind of fade out. You want to leave shadows in there. You want to leave gaps. Let's then go to our layers. Let's create another new layer. It will clip itself automatically. We'll go to our colors and move into the next lighter tone. So the middle of the second column there. Brush size, I'm going to stick to around about the 28%. I'm going to very lightly go over a few of the hill edges over here on the right, just to introduce some additional hues and different tones in there, making my way down towards the water's edge. And then as we get further back over here, the lighter tones are going to really take over, and you can overlap a lot of the green that you created, creating these light strokes, very light pressure, leaving gaps in between. Our bushes are going to sit on top of here as well, so you will lose a little bit of this. And then we can now make our way over towards the far edge, probably with an 18% brush size, just to get some quite small defined lines in there, and making our way again all the way down towards the water's edge, and then trying to just show the flow of the land, how flat it is in certain places, and then how it then ramps up right over here into this quite steep hillside. So I can go back in and probably emphasize a few lines in here just to kind of show that quite diagonal kind of line almost. So you should now see a sort of hillside there starting to take shape a bit more. We do have one more color to introduce. I will put it on a separate layer because I always like to separate my colors, but you could, after we've done this, pinch all three of these into one layer. So I'm going to go bottom of the second column now, and I'm just going to get in here probably with around about an 11% brush size, and I'm just tapping and just somewhat scraping at the same time to introduce random hues of green, this lighter new green. So random little patches in the land, random offsets of color that just, we don't need to explain them. We're just introducing random patches in here. They're just a bush or a bit of grass. I know I am somewhat explaining them now, but you don't necessarily have to do that in your work. Sometimes you can just do it. Just add in the color, add in the little patches here and there. So a couple of little dashes, you can scrape them up the hillside as well. And again, always feel free to lower your opacity if you wish, just so you can add in some further additional colors in here. I'm just going to wiggle my pen through there. I'm just trying to accent a few of the top of the hills, maybe even the odd couple of very light taps over here, just to show a little something catching some light potentially. So you should have a bit more of a varied hillside now. Now it's now time to move into adding in the trees. So we're going to go ahead and add in a layer that's going to have all of our tree trunks on. So I'm going to create a new layer at the top of the group, and we don't want it clipped. If it does clip itself, tap on it and tap on clipping mask to turn it off. You want to get rid of this icon here. Now what we'll do is we'll go to our land for a minute, we'll tap on it, just bring its opacity down to say 65%, just temporarily. And then on this new layer at the top, we're going to go to our colors. This color here, top left of the palette, and we're going to go back to our brush. We're going to go back into the option of the syrup brush under inking. You can set the size to around about 9, if not somewhat like 15 to 20 is still acceptable really. But we're going to draw in some trees. Now I want to start somewhat over here. I want to start by adding in one that's going to run. So again, look at my grid and the positioning of it. We've still got the 2 columns over here, and then we're going to move to around about here to introduce a tree. Light pressure at the top, getting gradually heavier towards the bottom, a nice solid trunk at the bottom. You can always run back up it. We're just drawing in the trunks to start with. We're going to draw in another one that's going to, I think, just a little bit higher than halfway. We're going to run that all the way down into a nice dark patch right down by the water. We're going to move up towards this area here with a fairly small tree, but that's on the opposite side of our banking. So I'm going to run it down just towards the edge of the land there. And we are trying to stagger this in a way that we can add in content like near to far as well. Now I'm just going to zoom out just the tiniest bit. Again, always look at my grid for my positioning. I'm going to press really firm now because this is a big old tree and I want it to dip in behind that gap there. And then I'm going to draw in another one, and that's going to be fairly close, but it's going to be a little bit higher. So it's going to start up here, press really, really firm. As I make my way down, I've pressed too firm and let go. And then I'll have to just go up and down it a few times in towards this little sort of dark patch in my ground there. We're going to add in 3 over here on the right, and then we're going to start populating them. So I think roughly, I think we could go to around about, say, here. Run that down into like a dark patch. Lovely. Let's go ahead and do a really large one over here on the right. Really large. But it's going to run to a similar level. Now I'm using, if you can see my hillside there in the background, I'm using this hill here as a guide so I can bury these trees in the dark patch between the 2 hillsides. So just in case you want something to aim for. And then over here, I'm going to do one a little bit closer and a little bit higher as well. Like it's going to jump into the land around about here. So that's my trees and where I've positioned them. We're going to go ahead and now start populating them all, but with branches. So we can probably keep it around about the 9%, though this is pressure sensitive, of course. So I'm going to work on this tree here, and we are just going to add in some small branches, and you may struggle with the pressure potentially. So if you do, just lower it down, press a little firmer if you need to. We're just going to make our way up towards the top and adding in some branches as we go. It's going to have a little bit of a almost like, it's going to be a little bit wider towards the top area, and you don't want to make them too wiggly. You just want to kind of draw in your branches to start with, but as long as you get a nice taper off the edge, that's what we want the most, that lovely thin point on the end. And then really light up here. If you need to, like you can do like I am, you can always extend the very top if you need to, and just add in some very small wispy ones towards the top. You can bunch them together. You can bring the brush size down, say like 3% if that's a little bit easier, like it is for me. And then you can just pack in a few more in those areas. And then, of course, we need to come down the opposite side as well. So you kind of also want to think about overlapping. So overlapping like a nearby tree. Some really small ones off of the tree trunk will look fantastic. It will give your tree some nice depth and 3D look to it as well. And in a minute, I urge you to go back in and add in some like split off branches like this. So you can populate it with your main tree trunk and the main branches, the main avenues for your tree. And then afterwards, that's primarily where you want to then start detailing. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to run one more off to there and then probably another one. So it's a bit wider towards the bottom. If anything, I could definitely start to think about widening up like this area here, and maybe even just like a rogue one that's running all the way off. So just something like this. And then we'll add in some small wispy ones in there, some branches. It's quite small detail as well. Don't forget, zoom all the way out just to get an idea of your general full silhouette and your shape. And we're just going to keep running in some small ones. especially these little small ones off the tree trunk. I always think they look great. They're potentially where the park, potentially where this is, are trying to maintain the growth and take care of the growth and cut it all down at the very bottom so it's nice and smooth so people can't climb them. And then all the branches then start to poke out. And sometimes you end up with all these small little stumps in here, which I think look great. It's just nice little areas of detail that we can introduce into our work as well. And I love drawing trees at the moment, just having good fun with it. And sometimes I think, to be honest, with trees as well, there's a lot less rules to it. You can afford to put a branch anywhere you want. It's just a general silhouette that needs to make the most sense. So once you've got something like this, all it is now is just a matter of moving on to the next tree. And you want to kind of use each tree as a sort of guide, really, as to what to do next, in terms of maybe this tree, I want to keep it a little bit slimmer. Now, potentially, you could also go ahead and set your branches onto individual layers so that you can turn off the tree beside it and it doesn't interfere. So this one here had quite a lot of branches pointing upwards. I'm going to try and make this one just beside it now have a little bit more of a horizontal push with the branches. So not quite as upright, maybe a little bit more horizontal. And I'm going to just run a few more. You can see this one might actually start to be quite a lot less, dense in terms of the branches. It's quite a thin one in terms of density, and maybe just a few little ones off of the tree trunk there, as I really like them. They just look great. So a couple of small ones running off, and you can keep it as simple as this. You don't need to overcomplicate it nor over sort of thicken it with too many branches. Maybe we'll do a couple of thin ones running off like so. But I'm going to keep it pretty skinny. I'm going to leave it like that. Now we're actually going to go right down now to around about 1% brush size. We're going to move all the way down to this one here. And we are going to just keep creating branches off of this one. This is a tree that has lost almost all of its leaves and foliage. We're probably not even going to detail this one. It's more the fact that we want a really branchy tree right down here. And it's got some really lovely thin branches, but they're all quite dense as well. So you want to kind of run branches up like so and just keep detailing this one. It's just going to be a tree. Maybe it's dead, but ultimately it's just over here nice and dense. Now while you're doing this, and I've got you for a second, I just want to let you know that if you haven't already seen, me and the one and only James Juliet, we have a weekly show here on YouTube, and that is the Sketch Wave, where we talk all things Procreate, digital art. We've got guests on the show, and it's a weekly show on YouTube. You can come and join in with the conversation. You can submit questions as well to the show, and we can answer them on the show. But again, that's the Sketch Wave, and it's available on YouTube. Episodes are every Tuesday, and we're really enjoying it. It's a nice little sort of different type of content for us, and we can sit and have a chat, talk about a few things. We've broken down some images. We have taken a look back at previous tutorials. We've had Flo on the show. We've had Kay on the show. We've had Mark from Pen Tips, the CEO of Pen Tips. And yeah, it's been really, really fun. And it's a project we hope you're enjoying as well. Let me know in the comments if you have listened to the show as well, if you enjoy it. We're really appreciative of all of the support that the show has had. So thank you if you are one of our weekly listeners. But if you haven't yet, again, I'll leave a link to it in the description down below. So at this point, I've got a really small brush size, just introducing loads and loads of branches in this tree. I want it to be nice and dense. I want it to have all of these lovely bits of detail. Now, what's really cool about this brush as well, when you get really, really small with it and granular like I am now, is it's quite pixelated almost. And that's great because it just gives you lots of really fine detail in here. This is literally what I was referring to earlier when I said that the trees are going to take a little bit longer to do. And that's why our foreground is going to take up the majority of this tutorial duration, because it's just a matter of creating all of these avenues for your branches and the detail. For example, this one we're not going to color in, I don't believe. And so this one, we can just make it a really fun, cool silhouette of just a tree that is just empty now. It's maybe it's turning into autumn in this environment, and we're gonna lose a few of the trees maybe, but definitely all the leaves are all gone now. Now I'm just trying to avoid making the shape a little bit too boring and straight up, straight down. That's why I'm trying to just introduce a few branches that are running out a little bit astray, just to change up the general silhouette of the tree. That's one thing that a lot of people tend to do, and I tend to do, is make trees a bit too boring, a little bit too boring in their general overall silhouette. So something like that tends to look what we kind of need for today's design. Now we're going to go ahead and start populating it with leaves. So we're going to go ahead and create a new layer for that. We're going to stick with the same color, and we're going to go to our brushes. We're going to go into artistic and the leatherwood brush. We're going to use a few different sizes. I think starting off, we want something around about the 2% mark, because we're going to introduce a tree that is right out here on the edge of our frame. So I'm going to start just pushing out with the leatherwood. Now my leatherwood, if I swipe it to the left and reset it, you can see it's already reset. So it's exactly normal. And maybe if you've got the time, bring it down to 85% and then start layering it on top. You want to create these kind of curved flick outs, and it follows the direction of your pen. So you want to kind of just draw outwards like this, and then at the top maybe just jump a little bit higher and kind of populate the very top edge. And then you can work out where maybe you want to leave some gaps in there, flow some of these branches out and into the scene. But ultimately we're trying to use this as a bit of a framing almost to our design, so we can chuck in a few more leaves. And there's a tree just somewhat right next to us, like right over here in our view, but it's just slightly out of frame. Then what you want to do is, I urge you to turn that layer off and create a new layer, and then populate the next tree. So let's set the opacity still to 85, but let's bring the opacity down to a smaller 2%, closer to 1 if anything, and then we're just going to populate the tree. So we're going to go up and down the tree, and then what you want to do is, I hopefully have stabilized this in post, you want to kind of create these kind of flicks outwards, and we want to go for lots of different levels of density. So I'm just creating flicks. You can see the direction I'm going in, and then I'll connect it to the tree somehow, and then occasional further higher flicks. Maybe I'll run it a little bit lower down. Gaps all look great, and you can always bunch them off of some of the bunches as well. For example, you could just create another little one running off of there, another one off of here, for example. You know, it's just where a branch has grown out from the very edge of the branch, and then it's going on its own route, its own path. So we'll go down there, and then don't be afraid in the middle as well, just the odd little tap along the tree trunk, like it's a branch that is maybe, as I always typically say, like maybe on the far side of the tree that we can't quite see, and so it's quite flat in terms of its shape. It doesn't flow out like some of these ones onto the outer edges. We're going to keep making our way down this tree, adding in some lovely detail and just flicking out all of these branches. Don't worry about getting too low down here. It's not going to be necessary to get all the way down to the very bottom, like towards the ground. And then I'm going to take a look at what I've done so far and try and correct a few of the things I've not liked the look of, because I've got some gaps in there. I can now try and create these little flick offs from here, a little flick up and down the column in the middle. Lovely. Couple of big flicks in there, and then keep adding in. And now occasionally you can also add in like the odd, like just a line like this. It's just a branch sticking out. It would be some nice detail. I urge you to do it if you can, if you've got the time more so, because I know these designs can take a lot of time to follow, let alone actually, you know, add in additional new things as well. But it will look great, so try your hand at doing that. And just keep going up and down the tree. And we turned off the other one because I didn't want it to get in the way. I wanted this one to have its own sort of space for a second to breathe, and also we can get an idea for what we're drawing and the density of it. And I'm going back over now, just trying to change the silhouette of the tree in certain places, maybe even a bit more green in the middle. So I'm just gonna see how quick and easy that was, and simple and boring almost, just straight up and down, wiggle through the middle of the tree just to make it really dense. And there you go, you've got one more tree done, and you can have it flick off at the right if you want to, or get a bit wider towards the base. It's totally up to you. Then what we'll do is we'll move to the next tree. So you can bring in the other one as well, just to turn it back on again. You can see your forest coming to life. It's quite a dense area here, so don't stress too much. if it's starting to look like one big blob, because that's what it's meant to look like. And if it's too much for you though, you can always go ahead and, just get rid of that first tree and now work around this tree. Potentially that's something I'll do towards the latter stages. You could get rid of that layer and do it again and work around it. We're going to create another new layer. We're going to go ahead. I'm just going to set the opacity a bit higher though. I'm going to set it to about 92%. The size is going to come down to a 1%. And we're just going to add in some detail on here. Now you've got your branches to go off of this time, so we can add in all of the small layers of leaves and density, and the same rules apply. You can add in a few towards the middle, towards the center of your tree. Again, branch maybe on the opposite side, and now you're just adding in all the green of the leaves. And as we're starting to get smaller, of course, it's going to start now getting nice and detailed, you're going to see a lot of pixels in here. We're to a degree, we are getting quite lost in the details in today's design. And you can just populate your tree, creating all of the lovely different avenues for all of the branches, like so. Taking a look at it, you can leave gaps in there if you feel like that's too dense. You want some variation as well. And if you're going to have like a forest area like this, some variation between the trees that are sort of neighboring to each other will look great. Some are a little bit skinnier, some get more light, some don't get quite as much light. It's slightly different species, maybe something like that. Whatever excuse you can come up with, to be honest, is fitting, and that's all that matters. So a couple of quite tight little clusters in here. I'm gonna try my hand at here, just trying to add in quite a dense area of detail, and then leaving a gap here between them. Nice little bit of separation. Lovely. Let's move over to this side over here. I'm going to keep going all the way down this tree. Of course, we've got the tree in behind, so don't get lost in the sort of branches from that. We're doing this tree here. We're not moving quite as far over yet. And you can at some points just literally just hold your pen down and just like wiggle, like squiggle, and sort of scribble in there, adding in some details along some of those branches. And then again, the odd little one that strays away is fine. A little one that kind of goes on its own little journey. A couple of nice little flicks in there. This one's quite skinny in terms of the amount of leaves on here. I'm definitely going to think about sort of adding in a bit more to it, giving it a little bit more detail. I'm going to go towards the bottom, a few little leaves down there. Again, a little bit through the middle of the tree. Look, even like a random patch in the middle somewhere like that will look great. Again, it's a branch on the opposite side. A tree's not flat. There's branches coming towards you and there's branches going away from you. So you're going to want to just add in a good level of detail. Now, this can take some time, I know. It can take time to fill out a tree sometimes and all the levels to it. And they can be a little bit daunting to do. But generally, that's pretty much what we're going to try and aim for. There's always room later on to add in more, just add in like a big dark blob there, just to add in like one that's extremely dense compared to the rest. And that should help, again, add in more variety as well. These trees are all growing extremely random directions, and you can make that your advantage, really. Then we're going to move to the next tree. Now, again, we can turn that one off. We can sort of leave it for a minute, and then we can add in this tree. I'm going to go probably a little bit smaller, but I'm going to make this one quite dense. So I'm going to create a new layer for this tree. I've turned off the one beside it just so I can see the difference and make sure I focus my attention. Now this one I'm going to draw more than I tap and dash. So this one I'm going to draw in quite a large sort of dense area along a lot of these branches, and then in a minute I'll go back over it with a couple of dashes and taps, so that this one's got some, again, variety in here. And then maybe a few in the middle again, just to add in and, create some interesting big, large flicks out from here, flicks out from the branch. We've got a big gap here in terms of negative space, so we can go ahead and just roll our tree and our branches into that here as well. I want there to be a clear distinction as well between these trees. So again, we'll just keep detailing our trees fair. And even though I've got no branches here, I'm still going to chuck some leaves in there. I don't want it to look odd in its general shape, and then a few dense areas in that. And let's just repeat that all the way down. I'm going to chuck a branch way out here. I want it to be nice and dense. As I mentioned, we want this one to have some quite thick growth on it. So I can add in some lovely branches, and to a degree you can always change this later on in the design as well. You may want to, of course, save your layers at some point, but this particular tree in area, I would urge you to try and save it just in case you don't like the general shape of it later. But you know, most people want to crack on otherwise, and we'll take it for what it is right now, and we'll see what it looks like towards the end. So just getting in there, making sure now I create the odd little branch flaring out from the edge, like so. Lovely little flicks in there, a couple of flicks in the gaps as well. I'm not going to over dense this area here too much because I don't want it to clash with the tree beside it. Now again, I'm just thinking of the general silhouette, trying to now throw out the odd random branch that's just sticking out a bit further, a little bit more interesting to look at, and then also changes up the whole silhouette of the tree as well. Now turn on the tree as well that we turned off beforehand, and now you'll be able to still see that that one's quite dense and this one's got a nice skinnier approach to it. We've got really nice variation. Definitely for me, I would probably go back in and change this one right over here, and I'll quickly do that now and come back to you. So I just added in a very slim tree in comparison to the one we did before, just trying to tidy it up, leaving a very, very slim gap between the trees just to make sure that they've got some breathing room. We're going to move to this tree here. So we're going to bring the size down to probably 1, maybe 2%. And this one, of course, doesn't have any branches on it. So this one, we're going to go really small. We're definitely going to go 1%. We are going to create branches and then lots of small ones running off of it, but utilizing the brush of the leatherwood instead of like the syrup brush. So we can now flare out all of these awesome branches out from here, creating more and more, probably go even smaller than that, and then out from there. So we're just creating more branches, and you can probably make this quite dense in here as well, so you can really thicken out some of the areas here. Let's try and wiggle my way through there. Now, again, this just follows the exact same principles, but because we're quite a small brush size, we've got lots more pixels to play with in terms of adding in detail. So you can really utilize that where you want to create a very small branch, but quite a kind of defined branch almost. So flaring that out, I'm gonna definitely have kind of the middle area of the tree quite dense in its sort of amount of branches and the amount of leaves. So I'm going to make sure that this general area here is quite thick. I'm going to run up and down, of course, the tree trunk as well, creating some more. And then as it makes its way further up, maybe I'll now start to think about leaving gaps in there just to allow some of the branches to breathe and then, you know, cross over at the same time. And maybe just jump to the top. I always like doing this. I like jumping around the trees, really. Starting at the top now, focusing all of those branches, a bit more of an upright angle to them because they've not flared out enough yet to the point where they start to weigh down on themselves almost. Like down here, you could probably start to really flare these ones out and create like really wide fallen lines in here. And get back in there maybe. Add in a few more dense lines in there. Lovely. And there we go. Let's keep going. We've got a few more areas to fill in. We're not going to fill in that skinny tree anyway, so I believe this is the last of the trees in the detailed area of our foreground to add in. We're going to color it in afterwards, and we're just taking a look at that tree. That's got some really nice natural gaps in there. I'm going to just adjust the shape of it. I want this one to have a bit more of a perfect kind of tree-like shape to it compared to maybe the other ones where I've let the other branches kind of flare and fall and chunk up maybe towards the top. I want this one to have that kind of Christmas tree style vibe to it in a sense where it just gets very wide towards the bottom. So just using the leatherwood there, nice and small. And then don't be afraid to get in there and create lots and lots of flicks. If you're going to sit here and detail this, like, and use such a small brush to detail, you might as well just sit here now and just couple more flicks in there to add in lots and lots of details on your branches, more and more, just to detail it up. Zoom all the way out and you'll end up with a really beautiful little tree there in the distance. Now that is obviously a lot of the tree line done, except for that one at the very back. The only thing we'll do for that is I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm just going to run out some really skinny branches. This is a dead tree back here. So I'm just going to run up some branches across, just very, very light, you know, just a few in there, very small percentages of the leatherwood still. I might even go down to its smallest size just to try and draw in some lines in there. And it's just a former tree. It didn't quite make it through, so we can just leave like a really skinny one, just like over here as well. But this one, for some reason, is the way it is. So we've done that, and that's all of our tree line done. So let's go ahead and go back to our land and turn up the opacity back up to max. We then want to go ahead and start coloring in some of these trees. Now we want to look for this tree here. So let's go ahead and find that in our layers. It's not that one, it's this one. So we're going to grab that one. We're going to go ahead and create a new layer in front of it and tap on it and clipping mask it to it. We're going to go to our colors and we're going to go ahead and grab a green tone. We're going to grab the bottom of the fourth column there, leatherwood brush in hand, 2% brush size, and just wiggle that green through the tops of some of these branches. Just look how quick and easy that is. If it's a bit too distracting with the other ones, turn off all of the other trees if that's easier. You can bring them back in, of course, in a minute. And just scattering in some green, mainly on the tops of all of these little clusters. Look how random I'm being. The brush size is set to 2%. We're just scattering in some green in there to add in some color to it. We're going to go ahead and do another tree in a similar fashion. And that's going to be this one over here, which was, if we find it in our layers, this little chap down here. We're going to go ahead and create a new layer in front of it, tap on it and clipping mask it. Now don't worry, in a minute when we're done here, we can somewhat compress these down and save on our layers. So we're clipped to this tree down here. We're going to start off with the same green, and I'm just going to run my pen along the ends like so, adding in a random scattering of green. That's all we need to do. It's very subtle on camera, but if we then go ahead and jump to, say, this color here, the bottom of the fifth column, we can add in a different green tone, again mainly towards the edges. And then again, let's go to our colors and grab this tone here, top of the fourth column from the right, but bring the opacity down a little bit to say 70%, size down to 1, and just on the ends, just a couple of new little taps of very light green up here. A couple of taps so you can layer the color on, of course, because it's a low opacity, and just random scattering. We just want a little bit of green to it. By all means, go crazy. Add in like a little bit of this mustard tone in the middle of the third column. Couple of little taps in here. Maybe it's starting to turn, and so maybe we can add in some lovely yellowy tones, mainly, let's say, try and focus up towards the top edges maybe, and let's go a bit more rogue. Let's grab the bottom of the third column. Now this wasn't planned in terms of my recording, but I'm just thinking, well, hang on, let's see if we can maybe introduce something different in here. A couple of yellow taps, and then I'll also grab the top of the third column, a little bit of brown in there, just to again vary up the tones a little bit more, just a couple of little tones in there, and zoom all the way out, and now you should have some nice variation in that tree. Now we do have to add in a very loose layer in front of that, and in fact I'm going to go right to the top of the foreground of all the trees and create a new layer. This is what we'll keep it all on. We'll go to our colors and we will grab the bottom of the fifth column. I'm going to grab the bottom of that's the bottom of the fifth column. Our brush wants to go back into the option of the drawing brush and the eagle hawk. We're going to keep the size fairly small, around about 10%, and we're going to bring the opacity down to about 70 as well. I'm just going to very lightly, probably with a smaller brush size, let's go to 4%, just tap away in here, trying to kind of add a bit of a blurry edge almost, and a bit more green to the tree. So I'm just running through really light pressure, and what this will do is this will just give me a bit more green in there, but also it's not hyper detailed like the rest. It's like a random scattering of green to just make it a little bit more dense and also soften it a little bit as well. So just a little bit of green running through there. We're equally going to do that over here as well on the tree that we previous colored as well. So this tree here, you can now layer on this green, and in fact you could probably go to the bottom of the next column, so the bottom of the sixth column, and then this one can layer on top. Again, towards the edges, just a little bit of green, just softening up the edge, taking away a little bit, but also adding in some new color tones in our tree. Just, you can hear tap and drag, little flicks in here of the green. I'm not going to add in too much in behind there, but just softening up some of those edges. You can see that's what we're going for, just a really light coat. If I press really firm, we still don't get there because we've got the low opacity. So we can just brush in a little bit of extra green, and that should thicken it out, but also make it look a little bit softer too. Let's go ahead now and start to work on some of the bushes. Now, before we do that, let's go ahead and bring in all of our tree layers again. Now, this is totally up to you of what you want to do. You can now pinch all of these together. You could, in fact, grab all your trees left to right, group them together and just call it trees. And then just collapse that group down. If you've got the layers, you can do that, or you can tap on the group now and flatten it. It's totally up to you, but you've got more options, of course, later on. We want to add in some bushes. We're going to create a new layer in front of our trees group. We're going to go to our colors and grab the bottom of the first column. We're going to make sure our brush is maximum opacity size, probably around about that 49%. Now we're in front of the trees as we speak. So let's try with a 49% and tapping with a little tiny drag. This is what we're trying to create. We're trying to create this very light amount of pressure to create these kind of bush-like shapes. Now I'm going to try and add some bushes in behind the tree on this land, but I'm also going to make sure I bush over the front of it as well, just creating some nice little areas of bush right down here at the very front. A couple more in there, leaving a little bit of a gap in between because we want to introduce shadows in a moment. And then I'll introduce some more a little bit higher as well, a little bit up here into this gap like that. Lovely. Then we'll go ahead and go to our colors. We'll just introduce a little speckle of color. We're going to grab the middle of the second column. We'll bring the brush size down to say a 28% and just a tiny few taps. You can see the minor amount of yellow that it's actually adding on to the bush, but I just want to add in a little bit of yellow in them, not everywhere. I'm going to sacrifice a lot of area. That's it, just a little bit of yellow tone in there. Then we're going to add in the shadows that are going to sort of sit underneath them. I'm going to go to our colors and grab the base color, top of the first column. You can do it on the same layer, you can separate it, but it's up to you. I'm now wiggling my pen, very, very light pressure. I'm going to make the brush size a bit bigger, 36%, and I'm just going to darken up the bottom area of some of these areas here. I'm going to darken up around the base of this tree, leaving a gap, but trying to leave the top edge of those bush-like shapes so that they are intact still. And now all we're doing is just shading kind of the underside, but darkening them. I'm trying to blend them into the landscape. So now I'm just wiggling my pen along a few of them. It might look quite messy, but again, when you zoom all the way out now, you've got this really beautiful, dense kind of bush growth down here. And then you're just fading it out into the darkness, and the darkness takes over everything. Let's move to some bushes that then sit all the way at the distant area. So we're going to go ahead and add that in, and that needs to also sit in front. So we'll create another new layer. We'll go to our colors, and we're going to primarily focus on these colors here, top of the third column. Brush size wants to be around about 18%, maximum opacity, and we're just going to create some little small bushes here, again tapping and pushing up, trying to get that brush to add in that kind of paint-like aesthetic to it. You can cover up the bottom of the tree there as well with a little bit, and then try and leave yourself a gap around the tree just so that it's got some space to breathe, and you don't want to try and focus on wrapping a bush in behind it, just leave it. So this just needs to kind of roll all the way to around about this midpoint here. So I'm going to add in some nice areas of orange tone. Don't go mad with it. Really, really light pressure as I'm tapping. So not opacity, but pressure on the screen. Just tapping and adding in some large bushes in here. And then let's switch the color. Let's go to the mustard tone in the middle. Probably bring the brush size down to 10. Now it's up to you. If you are really, really happy with the shapes you created, you've got two options. You can tap on the layer and alpha lock it. That means even if I draw here, it does nothing. I can only draw on the bushes that I've already created. Now, if you have kept it to a lighter level, potentially you don't want to do that. You can just tap on it and turn off the alpha lock and just add the yellow on top. Now, what you'll be doing is by doing that, you will be making things a little bit more dense in terms of the color and a little bit more solid in terms of the color. So to be honest, would kind of sort of work in the middle. I've added a few down there, and then I'll tap on the layer and alpha lock it. So now I can't paint outside of some of these areas. I simply just want to add in some yellow tone to them. What's already there, I don't want to sort of change it up too much. I don't want to destroy it. And then if I need to, I can go ahead and tap on it, unalpha lock it again, and just dash in some new areas of color on that layer. and in their yellow tone. So you can always use those two kind of methods to your advantage, because sometimes you might not want to add color. Likewise, in the trees, we added color on those branches, but we alpha locked it so we didn't make it too chunky and too dense. Now we're also going to go ahead and use the bottom of that bottom of the third column. Brush size a tiny bit smaller again, now 7%, and now I'm going to focus a little bit more yellow towards the top edges, maybe where the sunlight is catching a little bit more on here. A couple of little specks here and there. They're tiny. Don't forget how small the level of detail is here. Sacrifice some areas, you know, I'm going to leave this area here, for example. I'm going to add in some specks of yellow in here, just dashing away on top of there, and then maybe a little bit along the side of this bush area here as well. Just a little nice yellow spot. Now, just like before, we're going to add in some shadows. I am going to put them on a separate layer just to be sure. So I'm going to go to my colors now, grab the base color again, top left of the palette. Brush size probably around about that 12% range, and then just shade underneath them, kind of blending out the edge of the shapes. You don't need to do a drastic amount, but just a little bit of darkness just to fade out and run some darkness into some of the bushes as well, you know, just to break them down, show the underside of some of them, and also the shadows that it casts on the land. You know how quite kind of dense all this orange and yellowy kind of bush-like shapes are onto the land, and that's all it needs to be. That's the general finished kind of approach. A little bit of darkness in there just helps separate it all. Now we're also going to move into this area here, which is going to be more bushes, but we need to put them behind the trees. So we're going to go ahead and go down here to where our trees group is, tap on the layer below and create a new layer. Tap on it and unclip it if it clips itself. And then just like before, we're going to grab the top of the third column from the left. We're going to go to 49% on the brush size, and we're going to introduce a lot of orange tone in here, similar fashion, but of course we're behind the trees now. So I want to avoid going near this tree, because otherwise you just highlight the fact that it's almost floating. It's in this middle area of land, so I'm coming all the way down towards the edge of the land here, adding in a big chunk of orange and running that all the way up in behind these trees here now, showing that there's another massive wave of the bush-like shapes here. And I can add that all the way up here. Big bank of orange and yellow eventually. Now we'll also go ahead and grab the mustard tone, the middle of the third column. Again, similar principle. If you're happy with it, you know, you don't have to keep adding it on top. You can just alpha lock it and add the color in. I'm now just sprinkling in some of the yellow tone in there. Lovely autumnal kind of colors in here. But also we've got a nice mix of green as well, so it doesn't look too autumnal. And then again, we'll switch to the bottom of the third column, bring the brush size down to about 18%, so you can now focus a little bit more of attention on some of the top edges, some of the bushes, maybe where they're catching some light, you know, just the odd little shape here and there, a little dash. Keep it random, just literally just dash in, wiggle in, scribble in. It's just where a bush is just getting the tiniest little bit of lighting. Let's undo that one. Let's wiggle it along the top edge though, where the lighting is coming through from the opposite side, and then a couple of scrapes, a couple of wiggles, a couple of dashes. Lovely. And then we'll also go ahead and grab our colors and grab this color here, bottom of the first column, which was the color we used over here. And if we just dash in a little bit of this white, in fact, I will alpha lock the layer, so I can't add any more color. I can simply just layer color on top. I can sprinkle in some of this kind of more neutral kind of gray-like tone in here as well, towards like the top edges of a few of these bushes down here towards the land. So maybe they're a little bit more dead down here compared to up there. That's all we need to do. We'll create another new layer though, of course. We'll go to our colors and grab the top left of the palette, and we'll add in our shadow tone. So probably around about 35%, and if not bigger, in fact, sorry, we can go up to the 49 and just shade the underside of some of those bushes, the darkness that it's creating onto the land. You know, you can create really dark grooves in there, break down the bushes, and we can just wiggle our pen through here, create random avenues and cuts through there. You know, tap away as well. Don't be afraid to tap with the shadow tone as well to create more texture, but just breaking them down up here, especially on the rear. Just kind of break that down a little bit as it runs all the way up and over the edge of the hillside, almost onto the opposite side. So I'm adding in some quite dense shadow in there and really pushing it quite close up to the edge up here, but also in this bottom area, making sure we've got some shadows that sit underneath the bushes. So I've gone for a slightly smaller brush size now, just to wiggle my pen through and just create some really dark patches. We want the shadows to really take advantage of all of that color to create some really dark contrast. And there we go, we've got our hillside nicely all colored in. Now that is actually all of this hillside done. I did mention that this would take the longest. Alternatively, you could also grab some green, say this color here, the middle of the second column, brush size around about 16%, and add in some green on this little area of land here, just to kind of separate it. You could even go to a nice green like this one here, top of the fourth column from the right, and just tapping in some lovely green in there. Just a couple of little dashes in there just to have it have its own space, and it also now brings it forward in the design. So again, that's going to take up the majority of your time. And because you've got all the different layers, you can go back into, say, the very first layer we created with all the dark greens on. So it's top of the second column. Set it to 50% and just maybe add in a little bit more green in here if you feel like it's necessary. And also, because this is the darkest of the greens, it's quite subtle, so you can just let it flow through the trees a little bit more. But that's totally optional. You can decide what looks best for your hillside. Now, I'm really happy with how that looks. It's one layer, it's one group, should I say, so you can collapse it down like so, make it nice and easy. In a minute, we're going to duplicate it and flip it. So you can, at this point, we are done with it. I urge you to try and keep it if you want to, but otherwise you can tap on it and flatten it. It's totally up to you. Now let's move backwards in the design. Let's create a new layer, drag it underneath the foreground. We'll go to our colors. We're going to go ahead and grab this tone here, top of the sixth column. Your brush wants to be set to the option of drawing and the evolve brush this time. Now we've got a 6% brush size, and we are going to draw in a hillside that's going to start up here. It's going to run down. We've got a nice random edge to this brush, and then you can just fill in that edge a little bit more like so. And then I urge you to grab your brush, go to calligraphy and the monoline brush, make that size maximum size, and then just draw in a straight line roughly here, pop one finger on the screen, and then just link it up towards that big shape of the line that we created, and drag and drop the color into that space. You may need to get in there and just fill in some tiny little gaps. Then bring your monoline brush down to about 7% and just come along the water's edge there, just changing it up the tiniest bit so it's not a straight line. So it's got a little bit of character in there. You can add in like little dents in there, and the water can wrap around then. Now let's go ahead and color in this, and it's going to be a much more simple process than it was at the foreground. So we'll create a new layer, tap on it, and we will clipping mask it to it. We're going to go to our colors and grab the middle of the sixth column there. Your brush wants to go back though to the option of drawing and the eagle hawk. We're going to set the size probably to around about, say, 11%, and we're going to create diagonal lines running down this new cliff edge hillside all the way down in towards the water, keeping it simple. Some of them don't need to be fairly large. It's up to you how big of a kind of cliff edge you want to make it, but just a few little dashes, that's all you need to do. Some quite light pressure in there, or even a lower opacity at, say, 50%. You can create some additional lines, and you can even connect like lines running off. So I've done all these diagonal lines, and what I mean is I could set the brush size to, say, 5% and create lines like this to create kind of flatter surfaces on the top of some of those shapes, and to show that they are kind of rocky areas rather than just the land running straight into the rock and off the edge. You can change your color to, let's actually try and grab a little bit of this color here, bottom of the first column. Make sure that opacity is 40% and the size is nice and small, about 5, and just dash in a few areas of little additional tone in here. Keep it real random. There we go, just quick dashes along some of those colors. That's all I want to introduce. Then we're going to have some real fun here. We're going to go to the layer here. We're going to tap on it and we're going to alpha lock it so we can't paint outside of it. Look at me saving layers. And then we're going to go to our colors. We've got all of these colors here now to play with, and this is how simple we're going to keep this. We're going to go to the middle of the middle of that sixth column. We'll set the opacity to 85%. We'll set the size to around about 18, and we're just going to wiggle in at sort of diagonal levels almost some trees. And that's it. Just a few wiggles at slightly diagonal, pointing down. You know, try and maybe create like a bit of an edge almost, but little random wiggles of brown. Very quickly though, jump to the green at the bottom of that same column, and then wiggle in some of these greens near it. So wiggling this in like this should give you the illusion of trees. You can even bring it a little bit smaller if you want, down to like an 8%. It's going to get blurred in a minute anyway, and we just want to kind of give the nod that a lot of these trees are getting some light. It's big old hillside up here that's getting some light and illuminating the edges of some of those trees. So just little diagonal wiggles and squiggles. That's all we want to do. We've got more color tone to introduce, but as you get further down, maybe you go back to the larger brush size and try and show some more grander shapes in here. So what I'm drawing is essentially, if we had a tree like this, I'm kind of drawing a wiggle to try and simulate this edge here of the tree. So that's all I'm doing, just little squiggles and wiggles. I'm going to try and really vary up my sizes as well now, because I want to make sure if I have some really small ones in there, just little speckles of something catching some light. Really random little squiggles. We're trying to just create like a dense forest with all the different color tones and everything else in there. You have to leave a lot of space though for your shadows. So the shadows are the color of the actual base of the hillside here, that dark green. Then go to your colors. We've got 3 more color tones here to introduce. We've got like this nice peachy tone at the bottom of the 4th column from the right. I'll set it back to 11% and I'll scribble in some of these like warmer trees in here, a couple of dead ones maybe, or just a different species of tree again that is affected by the season maybe. You can really just do what you want. A couple of squiggles, and we can set the brush size to larger, like an 18%, and kind of patch that in quite quickly. Light pressure as well, just random squiggles in here. A couple of lighter pressures will look great, especially if you can build up lots and lots of color tone in here. You know, in certain areas, don't be afraid to just do something rogue like this, like a rogue sort of peachy line running through there. That's fine. Maybe here I'll create like a rounded shape here to kind of simulate some sort of tree area. And then I've got more colors. I've got this more pasty green color here, middle of the same column. Introduce that into here. This one's got a little bit less saturation. You can go over the top of some of those oranges as well. Wiggle your pen through, all sorts of variation. Try and run like the odd solid kind of line though down towards the water's edge, so that there's some kind of definition of something happening, making its way down. And we'll also switch to the top of the same column. So the lighter green now. Wiggling our pen through. You can go over the top of some of them. You may go a bit too mad with this, and if you do, you can always go ahead and just bring back in by selecting the green tone that we set as the background for this, and just go back in again. So we've got some really cool variation in here. I think I'm almost done with my trees. I'm going to add in like a few random light green squiggles in here. Look how simple that is. Then what we'll do is we'll go to the layer, we'll tap on it and turn off the alpha lock. We're then going to go to our smudge tool, tap on the smudge tool and use drawing and evolve. We'll set the opacity to 100%, size to around about 2, if not bigger. Let's go up to around about 3 or 4 and just push up in straight lines. Now, if you want to make life really easy, you can actually go to the layer, tap on it and turn on the drawing assist. Because we're using a grid, what that will mean is I can only smudge now in a vertical or horizontal fashion. And it means that I can just draw vertical lines really quickly in here, especially on the edge of the shape. So I can really vary it up, make it look like peaks of a forest rather than that kind of rounded evolve brush shape. So I can push up a few colors in here. I can push up greens. I can push up the base color, that dark green, and break down some of those. So, you know, pushing a dark green up and through some of the light tones that we dashed on top. You don't need to go too mad with this, but just a few lines here just to simulate a few peaks of some trees will look great, especially if you notice like a particular squiggle in your work that you think, hang on, that's probably a bit too prominent. I'll get rid of that. And you can push your pen right down using the point of the pen and just create a bit more of a tree line up there. And just a few wiggles. So this one's way, way easier. And that's just a general rule. You don't have to detail to a degree things further back. You know, focus your attention here and your time and let that just fade out. Now what you could do is also just make sure that there's a good amount of space in some of those for like some dark tones to live. So you can push up that dark tone, you know, create little gaps in there so that it's not one solid lump of color. I've got this like tree here, and then I've got a big gap, and then I've got the rest of the forest. Let's add some lighting to this. So we'll go to our layers, we'll create a new layer. So we've got the layer above and we'll create a new layer. tap on it, clipping mask it also in, go to the blend mode and change it to the option of overlay. We're going to go to our colors and grab the yellow tone in the middle of the far right column. Brush wants to be set to the option of airbrushing in the soft brush. And I'm going to set the size to 40, it's way smaller than that, sorry, 25%. And we're going to go down here. Notice how it's going to make things really nice and vibrant and green on that top area here. So leaving the bottom left a bit darker. We're going to do it again. We're going to create another new layer, tap on it, clipping mask it, and change the blend mode from normal to the option of overlay as well. Bring that brush size down a bit smaller though now to around about 11% and focus a lighter bit of color on the top edge only and leave the bottom a little bit more faint. So you want to have a nice bright spot towards the top. Then what we'll do is we're going to go to our layers. We're going to grab the layer that we clipped here at the bottom for the rocks. You can see it turning on and off. Tap on it and flatten it down. So we're going to actually go to the option of merge down. So it's all on one layer now. You want to tap on this and make sure alpha lock is turned off. So there's no check there. We want to go to our adjustments. We want to go to Gaussian blur. We want to swipe from left to right and we want to add in a 5, maybe even 6% Gaussian blur. But 5% will do the trick for now, and tap on your adjustments when you're done. And then we're going to add a mask to this. So we're going to tap on it, add a mask, and then making sure you're on the mask here. You want to tap on the layer and also go ahead and turn off the drawing assist. Again, making sure you're on the mask. Your color is set to black. Still the soft airbrush, probably around about 16 to 20% here in terms of size. We want to fade out the top edge. We want to fade this out. So circular motion, fading that out a little bit more down here in behind the trees, just allowing that to kind of fade. And I want to just get rid of that kind of tree line, making it nice and faint. So now you should end up with a little bit of a different look to it. Now again, this is totally optional. You can go back in to this layer again, tap on it. You can go drawing assist. You can then go to your smudge. You can either use evolve or you could use something like the soft airbrush and set the brush size to say something around about 1 or 2% and maybe just run a couple more defining shapes up here because we've lost a little bit of that because of course we blurred it. You may want to just draw in a few like vertical lines of varying different sizes and shapes. So like a large one there maybe, just to define your hillside a little bit more. So we want it blurred, but we don't want to maybe lose too much of those tree-like silhouettes that we had. So I'm going to find some dark tones in there. You can even push some through here, and using the soft airbrush will just keep things nice and faint. Otherwise, if you use the evolve brush, which is perfectly fine, you may want to just blur the layer again, but you're going to get really blurred, of course. So I'm just going through now, pushing up, making sure I just create some dark lines here and there, pushing up, creating a lovely little tree hillside. Pushing up some green, light greens up, pushing some dark greens up as well. So the base color through some of those light tones that we sat on top. You should end up with a really, really pretty hillside here. Very simple to try and create something that just gives you the nod, gives you the impression of what it's meant to look like and what it's meant to symbolize. But all in all, saved a ton of time with some detail there. Now, potentially we will tone this down as well with the layers, so keep hold of them for a minute. We're going to create a really, really simple layer in behind. So we'll go from left to right on all of these layers here that we just used for that and group them together. And we'll just call it 2. So it's group 2 because it's the second group back. We'll collapse that down. We'll create a new layer, drag it underneath group 2. We'll go to our colors and we will grab the top of the second column from the right. Brush wants to go back to the option of drawing and evolve. Brush size, 6%. Really simple hillside now. I'm going to go a little bit higher this time, run through that little sort of point there of our drawing guide of the grid, and then run this all the way in behind and just keep going. Just thicken it out, keep going all the way down. So you may have to really color this in, block it all in, and then we're going to go to our adjustments, Gaussian blur, left to right, about sort of probably go up to around about 10-11% here. Tap on your adjustments when you're done. Then go to the layer, tap on it, mask it. On the mask, making sure you're here. Your color is set to black, and your brush is now changed back to airbrushing and the soft brush. We set the size to around about, say, 15%, and let's fade that out a little bit on the top edge, just fading that out, and potentially just the lightest little bit of fade out in between those layers. So maybe just introduce like a bit of mist or something, kind of just low hanging between them, or just fade out the top edge. It's just a little bit of extra background content. And then just like before, you can go to the layer, make sure you are on the layer, tap on it, and also add the drawing assist. Go back to your smudge tool, soft brush again. And again, you can just run up a few little lines in there if you want to, just to create a bit of a foresty like aesthetic where it's most visible. So we kind of get the impression of what it's meant to be, even though of course it's super, super blurred out in the distance. Just a little something. Next, let's go ahead and just work on the reflections. So we're going to go to our layers. We're going to create a new layer and drag it underneath that hillside at the back. We're going to go to our colors and grab the color in the top right of the palette. And we're going to go to our selection tool, making sure you use the option of rectangle and color fill is turned on like this. So it needs to be blue. And then just draw in behind that hillside and just block in the water shape. Now we need a shape down here. If we tap on our selection tool when we're done, what we've done is if I tap on it and invert it for you, it fills in this whole bottom area. Now I'm going to tap on it and invert it back because we need it to be the correct color, of course. Now what we need to do is add in the reflection. So we're going to go to our layers. We want to hold down on our foreground. Now, if you have gone ahead and, for example, flattened it into one layer, you can just do the same thing again. But if you've got a group, again, just hold down on the tick, turn off your background color, then go ahead and swipe down with 3 fingers and go to the option of copy all. Then go to your layers, hold down on the tick again, and also tap on your background color. Go down to that block of color that we created and go ahead and swipe down with 3 fingers and go to paste. Then flip it vertically, drag it down, and make sure the tip of the land over here on the left hand side is just touching. Don't worry about the rest. Just make sure you tap and drag it over to there and tap on your cursor when you're done. Now you've got your land reflected, but of course we need to add some effects to this. So we're going to go to our layers. We're going to go ahead and swipe from left to right on that and the blocked layer below. Group it together and we'll just call it water. And then the layer that's clipped, so the layer that's been pasted, we're going to tap on it. We'll clip it just in case. And we'll also go ahead and change its blend mode from normal to the option of hard light. And from there, you can then bring the opacity right down. Now, you could probably set it to around about, say, 60% and then see once we add the rest of the effects what it looks like and maybe change it. So I'm going to leave it like that. I'm going to create a new layer, tap on it, clipping mask it to the water. I'm going to go to my colors and I'm going to grab the color in the top left of the palette. Brush wants to be set to airbrushing in the soft brush. And with a brush around about, say, 15%, I'm going to go ahead and darken up the bottom right corner here. I'm going to darken up in behind the land so that I darken underneath it. So I'm going to go ahead, for example, and just darken along there. I'm going to bring the brush size even smaller to around about 6% and just add in a bit of darkness along this edge like so. I'm then going to go ahead and set the brush size to around about 8%, if not larger, 11 to 15, and go along the bottom of our frame here. And then a little bit of a blend out over there on the left. But making sure this bottom right corner's got some good darkness to it. Let's create some waves in here as well. And one easy way we can do that is just go down to the clip layer, so of all the actual water. We can go ahead and tap on it and add the drawing assist to it. So we can only go horizontally. We're going to go to our smudge tool. Tap on our smudge tool. We can use the soft brush. That's perfectly fine. Small brush size, maybe 1%. And you can now smudge inwards to the shape. You can push outwards as well. Set the brush size a little bit smaller, maybe like a 1%. And just go left to right through that. Just really break it down, push out a few areas here, darken that up. Now we will try and amend a few things in a minute, but I'm going to set the brush size varying amounts to like a 1% to a 2% and everything in between. So you can smudge, but you can also erase as well. So I'm going to do a few smudges and then I'm going to erase as well. So I've done a few smudges. I'm going to go to my eraser, tap on the eraser, and we'll use the option of the leatherwood. But we'll set it really, really small, like 1, and we're just going to run through here, just erasing into there. We can probably set the opacity down to say 50% as well, so we can end up with some nice brighter and also some slightly more dull erosions as well in there, so you can really vary it up. Run through there like so, just erasing, and then switch back whenever you feel like it. So you can cut back, you can even make the opacity higher if you want to, if it's not quite erasing enough for you. Get rid of a lot of this like so. Just trying to break that down. It's over here that it's going to look the best because you're going to bring in some of the light tones in behind. But we are going to add in some more tones in a minute on top of the water. One thing you can do is as well just erase around the kind of base here of some of these rocks as well, just to give them a little bit more color. You can even erase like a little bit around the edge of the land as well. Now you might not see too much, especially with that dark tone in behind, but that's fine. It's just some extra little measures we can go to. Again, we can grab our smudge tool. We can grab the brush and start smudging it out. Smudge all the way in, break down a lot of those colors, the solid shapes of them. It might take a little bit of time. At the front here, you may want to go rogue and just grab a really big brush size, like a 2%, and really just disperse that kind of color of your reflections, like so. Get rid of the edge, and that's fine. It will still look really beautiful and kind of milky almost. Lovely. Let's create a new layer in the water group. So let's create a new layer. And in fact, let's drag it all the way to the very top, just temporarily. We're going to tap on this layer. We're going to drawing assist it. We're going to go to our colors and grab the middle of the first column. Your brush wants to be set to artistic, leatherwood. Size will vary around about 1%, and we're going to keep creating horizontal lines. Now, by all means, hold down on this layer if you want to. So you can turn off every other layer and just create lots and lots of horizontal lines and dashes in here. Now your lines want to get a little bit thinner towards the back. So you want to prioritize small, very faint lines towards the top, which will be the back of our water. Set the brush size a bit bigger, 2%, couple of dashes towards the front, and then keep making your way through here. A couple of small dashes will look great, a couple of large ones. Again, we can only draw horizontally, which is perfect. It's doing all of the work for us, all of the care and attention really to having to make sure not every line is horizontal. Lovely, nice and random. Couple of chunky ones if we want to, just to be a bit more rogue. Then go back to the layer, hold down on the tick. Let's bring it down and into our water group. It will clip itself automatically. Then grab your cursor, use freeform, and flatten that right down. And then just to the point where you can see it just going in behind the land. Maybe you bring it a little bit lower down towards us and tap on your cursor when you're done. You should now have some really nice variation in the water. If it's a little bit too firm for you, you can always grab your brush and go adjustments and go to the option of either motion blur or Gaussian blur. I'm going to go to motion and drag horizontally just a little bit. So let's go just to around about, say, 5 to 8%, I reckon, horizontally. Tap on your adjustments when you're done. You've got some really beautiful little sort of waves in your ground at the bottom now. Now we just need to add in 2 final little touches to really round off the lighting. So if you've made it to the end, this is really when it starts to pop, in my opinion. I'm going to turn off my drawing guide. I don't need it on for a minute. I'm going to go to my layers and we're going to go ahead and create a new layer, drag it out of the water group and down to the background. We're going to go to our colors and grab the middle of the far right column. Brush wants to be set to airbrushing, soft brush. Size around about 26%, just in behind here. Just a slightly more yellow tone and blend it out and into the background. So you're going to introduce a bit more yellow into your scene now. It's going to look a little bit warmer. Then we're going to go ahead and go right to the top of our layers. Create a new layer. Set the blend mode to the option of soft light. And then set your size probably to around about that 40% mark and tap in the exact same spot but go round in a circle. And you can create this kind of really nice soft kind of lighting effect to the background. If you actually turn this on and off, you see a massive difference. Look at that, how it just adds a really nice kind of filter almost to the top of your layers. It exposes a lot of the greens in the tree as well. And to me, it looks really pretty. We've got a really lovely lighting happening there in the background. And then we are done with today's design. So we can pinch with 2 fingers, we can go full screen with 4, and we end up with your finished design. So make sure to tag me in your finished creations wherever you decide to share them. Instagram and Facebook are really good for you to tag me in your work for me to see it. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more weekly Procreate content. And if you want even more tutorials from me, you can come and join me over on my Patreon, where I now have a catalogue of well over 120 Patreon exclusive tutorials that are available just to my patrons. And you can join from as little as $4 a month. And you get access to every single one of those tutorials. You get your name featured in videos, sneak peeks, early access, and much, much more. And I can do you one even better, and you can go and check out my website, linked in the description down below, and see every single design I've got over there before you join, so that way you can see which tutorials take your fancy. So I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial, and if you like this one here on YouTube, you'll love this one on the screen now. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.